On a sweltering June day in 1976, a high-stakes meeting took place in Memphis, Tennessee, that would entangle some of the most powerful figures in the aviation world. The subject: a lucrative deal to refinance, upgrade, and lease a luxurious Jetstar airplane owned by none other than Elvis Presley's father, Vernon Presley. The proposed plan was as complex as it was lucrative, promising a hefty monthly profit for Elvis Presley. But this deal would unravel in a tangled web of deceit, bad checks, and legal battles. At the heart of this story were key players: Nigel Winfield, a seasoned aircraft broker known for his dealings with Presley; Frederick P. Pro, Elvis's father's lawyer and a key figure in Presley's business empire; and Gabriel Robert Caggiano, an attorney with ties to the World Aircraft Exchange, a company specializing in aircraft leasing and modifications. The plan was straightforward in theory: sell the Jetstar to a leasing company, use the funds to upgrade the plane to meet strict federal aviation regulations, and then lease it back to Presley and another company for a handsome monthly profit. The catch: the upgrade would cost a staggering $350,000, a hefty sum even in 1976. But with the plane's value projected to skyrocket to $950,000 after the upgrade, the potential for profit was immense. The meeting on June 24, 1976, brought together a who's who of aviation insiders. Alongside Winfield and Pro were Hans Ichterman of WWP Leasing, Caggiano, and Raymond W. Bassner from World Aircraft Exchange. Also present were lawyers Charles Davis and D. Beecher Smith, representing Presley. The atmosphere was charged with excitement and anticipation. However, Smith later recalled a sense of confusion, as he had only been pulled into the meeting at the last minute by his law partner. The original plan had been to close the deal in May, but a change in the sublease agreement pushed the signing back to June. The core of the deal involved Elvis Presley, through his father Vernon acting under power of attorney, selling the Jetstar to WWP Leasing. The company would borrow money to cover the existing debt on the plane, estimated at over $600,000, and the cost of upgrading it to meet FAA standards. Once upgraded, the plane would be valued at around $950,000 on the open market. Elvis Presley would then lease the plane back to WWP for 7 years, earning $16,755 per month. After 7 years, he could buy the plane back for just $1. But the real moneymaker was the sublease to Air Cargo Express. Presley would lease the plane to them for $17,755 per month for the same 7-year period, pocketing a $1,000 profit each month. Bassner's role was crucial. As an agent for World Aircraft Exchange, he was tasked with overseeing the plane's upgrade to meet FAA requirements. This involved extensive modifications, estimated to cost $350,000, to ensure the plane could fly under the strict rules of the Federal Aviation Regulation 121 maintenance program. However, the deal hit a snag almost immediately. The lease agreement drafted by Caggiano was deemed unacceptable by the Chemical Bank of New York, the bank handling the loan. Instead, the bank provided their own 23-page agreement, far more detailed and complex. The first payment was made on June 23, 1976, with 2 checks from Presley to WWP Leasing, each for $16,755. These checks represented the first and 84th monthly rental payments. Simultaneously, Elvis Presley received 3 checks from Fred Pro II for $17,755 each and 1 for $40,000, covering the sublease premium. But the celebration was short-lived. The checks from Pro turned out to be invalid, returned by the bank with a note suggesting the funds may have originated from Jamaica. Pro explained later that there had been an error in the transfer, but the damage was done. The deal was in disarray, and trust was shattered. This incident highlighted the risks involved in such complex financial transactions, especially when multiple parties with varying interests were involved. The Jetstar deal, once a promise of easy profits, had become a cautionary tale of greed, deceit, and the pitfalls of high-stakes business dealings. On July 13, 1976, Sidney Zeimer, an attorney for WWP and Chemical Bank of New York, went to Memphis with documents. These documents were about changing some things on an airplane lease to Elvis Presley. Zeimer met with Smith and Davis at Davis's home. At the same time, two other men, Caggiano and Bassner, showed up without being invited. They had some bills for upgrading the airplane's equipment. Elvis Presley, through his lawyer Zeimer, had signed these bills, but there was a problem. The original lease said that WWP had to pay for upgrading the airplane, not Presley. So Presley needed Zeimer's approval to sign the bills. After talking it over, Presley signed the invoices. This meant WWP would pay, even though they didn't want to oversee the upgrades themselves. The bills were from World Aircraft Exchange, Inc. They were dated July 7, 1976, and were for different parts of the airplane upgrade. One bill was for $17,500 for certifying the airplane met certain safety standards. Another was for $32,000 for buying specific equipment like flight recorders. There were also bills for $129,500 for maintenance systems and $45,000 for more certification work. The final bill was for $117,500 for various improvements and tests. All these bills totaled millions of dollars. Smith was confused because the bills had strange numbers like 106 EP, 206 EP, and so on. He didn't know what these meant and thought World Aircraft should explain them. On July 20, 1976, Smith went to Davis's home again. Davis had received a document from Fred Pro, who wanted to change the lease. This change would let AGM Financial Corporation handle the lease instead of World Aircraft Exchange. This could also mean changing the bank that held the lease funds. Before the new lease was signed, Caggiano met with Presley, Smith, and Davis. They talked about Pro's issues with a bank called ACHTMNN. Caggiano was looking to switch from WWP to a new leasing company due to slow payments. A person named Nigfeld suggested AGM Financial, but Presley refused this idea. Later, Caggiano came to Memphis with a large cashier's check from the Chemical Bank. Presley had already accepted invoices from ACHTMANN and wanted to pay them directly, bypassing WWP. This was unusual because the lease said WWP should handle these payments. Presley asked Smith and Davis about this. Smith thought ACHTMANN, being in the business, should know if the work was done. Presley then told them that Caggiano, Bassner, and Pro had already met with him at the bank. There, Presley signed a personal check for $17,500 to Fred Pro, which matched one of the invoices. This check was a key moment because it showed Presley was willing to bypass the official lease terms and pay directly. This move raised more questions about who was in control of the airplane's upgrades and payments. The story of Elvis Presley's Jetstar plane and its tangled finances reveals a web of deceit and misconduct. At the heart of this tale is a man named Smith, who played a crucial role in uncovering the truth about how Elvis's plane was involved in complex financial schemes. Elvis Presley owned a plane called the Jetstar, a Dassault Falcon. To manage its maintenance and leasing, several entities were involved. One such entity was World Aircraft Exchange, WAE, led by Frederick P. Pro and later by Angelo G. Manarino. WAE was supposed to handle the upkeep and leasing of the Jetstar, but got entangled in financial misdeeds. Initially, Presley prepared cashier's checks amounting to $317,500 for various corporations linked to WAE. These checks were meant to cover maintenance and other expenses. However, things quickly went wrong. When it came time to pay Frederick P. Pro, who was the president of Air Cargo Express, Inc., a part of the invoice totaling $117,500 was not fully paid. Pro received only a portion of what was owed, after Presley deducted amounts for checks that had been returned by the bank. Smith believes that Frederick Mann and WAE worked closely with Pro and others, possibly even directly with Presley, to bypass proper channels for paying these funds. This suggests a deliberate attempt to sidestep Presley's usual procedures, likely to hide the misuse of funds. Further complicating matters was a proposed leasing arrangement involving another aircraft, a Dassault Falcon Model 20C. This deal was brokered by Nigel Winfield of a company called AGM Financial Corporation. AGM sought to lease another of Presley's planes, similar to how they handled the initial Jetstar deal. Angelo Manarino, now leading WAE, drafted agreements with Presley for this new arrangement. However, the plans hit a snag. Despite agreements being signed, payments were not made as expected. Presley was asked to make direct payments to Manarino and others, but his bank refused to honor these checks. This left Presley in a difficult position, unable to finalize the deal. Things took another turn when Air Cargo Express, another entity linked to WAE, failed to make a rental payment for the Jetstar. This delay caused further complications. Presley had to negotiate and even received an extension from WWP, the original lessor of the Jetstar, to avoid losing the plane. Throughout these dealings, Presley was misled about the use of funds. Smith pointed out that over $200,000 was promised for upgrading the Jetstar to meet 121 maintenance standards, a certification needed for certain flights. However, none of the promised upgrades were actually carried out. Instead, the funds were allegedly used for other purposes like paying off debts or personal gains. One key figure in these schemes was Robert Caggiano, who emerged as a significant player when Smith discovered him in Miami. Caggiano was linked to World Aircraft Exchange and was involved in promising work on the Jetstar that never materialized. He also received payments that were later found to be dishonored. The situation escalated when Presley's plane was taken back by its original lessor, Span East Airlines, due to non-payment and regulatory non-compliance. This action highlighted how the financial manipulations had jeopardized Presley's ownership and use of his plane. Smith's investigations revealed that World Aircraft Exchange used multiple front companies and individuals to carry out these schemes. They misled Presley and others about the progress and financial status of the Jetstar, all while siphoning off substantial funds.